The dismissal bell at Riverside Academy rang at 3:15 on a Wednesday afternoon in October 2025, and Nicole Harrison was standing in the designated parent pickup area when it happened, the moment that would unravel into something larger than either she or the woman beside her could have anticipated. Nicole had parked her Range Rover in the circular drive, the one reserved for parents collecting students, and she was leaning against the passenger door, watching the main entrance, where children in navy and khaki uniforms were beginning to stream out in clusters of laughter and backpacks. She was dressed in what she thought of as her casual uniform: dark jeans, a cream cashmere sweater, ankle boots, her hair in a neat bun, diamond studs her only jewelry besides her wedding ring, and the Cartier watch she had bought herself when her company went public. She checked her phone, saw a text from her assistant about a board meeting that had been moved to Friday, and was typing a response when she heard the voice beside her, bright and friendly, and making an assumption that sent ice through her veins. "Excuse me, which family do you work for?" Nicole looked up from her phone, turned to see a white woman in her early 40s standing next to a black Mercedes SUV, smiling in that way that suggested she was being polite, making conversation, establishing the social order of the pickup line. The woman was wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent, her blonde hair in a high ponytail, her face showing the smooth, tight quality that came from regular Botox and an excellent dermatologist. She was holding a Starbucks cup and waiting for Nicole's answer, as though it were the most natural question in the world. For a moment, Nicole could not process what she was being asked. Then the meaning clicked into place, sharp and familiar and exhausting. "I'm sorry, what?" The woman's smile wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "I was just asking which family you nanny for. I haven't seen you at pickup before, so I thought you might be new. I'm Jennifer Caldwell. My son Parker is in 3rd grade. We're always looking for good childcare recommendations." Nicole felt the anger rise, cold and controlled, the kind that came from a lifetime of these moments. The assumptions that no matter what you wore, or how you carried yourself, or what you had accomplished, your blackness marked you as service, as help, as someone who could not possibly be the parent, could not possibly belong in the same category as the white mothers in their luxury SUVs and their athleisure and their easy confidence that they were the center of every space they occupied. She took a breath, forced her voice to stay level, and said, "I don't work for anyone. I'm here to pick up my children." Jennifer's face went through a series of rapid adjustments: confusion, then embarrassment, then something that might have been disbelief. "Oh," she said, and the word hung in the air for a beat too long. "I'm so sorry. I just assumed. I mean, you were standing here, and I thought, well, I apologize." She laughed, a nervous sound that was meant to diffuse the awkwardness but only made it worse. "I guess that was pretty presumptuous of me." Nicole stared at her, debating whether to let it go, to accept the apology and move on, or to push back, to make Jennifer Caldwell understand that her assumption was not a harmless mistake, but part of a pattern, a system, a set of beliefs about who belonged where and who could be dismissed as invisible or interchangeable. Before she could decide, the doors opened wider and children began pouring out in earnest, and Nicole saw her daughter Zara, 8 years old with her hair in 2 puffs tied with ribbons, running toward her with her younger brother Isaiah, 6, trailing behind with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. "Mommy!" Zara called out, throwing her arms around Nicole's waist, and Nicole bent down to hug her, to kiss the top of her head, aware that Jennifer Caldwell was still standing there, watching, processing. "Hi, baby," Nicole said. "How was your day?" "Good. We did a science experiment with volcanoes, and mine was the biggest eruption," Zara said proudly, and Isaiah chimed in with his own story about recess and a game of tag, and Nicole listened, nodding and asking questions, all while feeling the weight of Jennifer's gaze, the discomfort radiating from the woman who had made the assumption and was now witnessing its incorrectness in real time. Jennifer cleared her throat. "Well, I should go find Parker. Again, I'm sorry about the confusion." She turned and walked away quickly, disappearing into the crowd of parents and children, and Nicole watched her go, feeling the familiar cocktail of anger and exhaustion and the knowledge that this was not over, that the assumption Jennifer had made was probably one shared by other parents, other teachers, other people who saw a black woman at school pickup and could not imagine her as anything other than the help. If you are reading this and thinking about the invisible labor of navigating spaces where your presence is questioned, where you are seen but not recognized, where the default assumption is that you do not belong, then you understand why Nicole Harrison stood in that pickup line, feeling both furious and resigned. This is a story about what happens when those assumptions are challenged, about the institutions that protect them, and about the cost of demanding that people see you as you are, rather than as they expect you to be. Nicole buckled the kids into the back seat of the Range Rover, responded to their chatter about school with the attentiveness they deserved, and drove the 10 minutes back to their home, a sprawling colonial on 3 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut. The house had 6 bedrooms, a pool, a tennis court, and a view of Long Island Sound. That had been one of the selling points when she and her husband Dominic had bought it 4 years ago, after Nicole's company, a fintech platform called Equiledger, had been valued at $2.3 billion in a Series D funding round. Nicole was the founder and CEO, a black woman who had started the company in her late 20s with a vision for democratizing access to financial tools and who had spent the last decade building it into one of the most successful fintech companies in the country. Dominic was a corporate attorney at a white shoe firm in Manhattan, specializing in mergers and acquisitions, and together they represented the kind of success story that was supposed to be proof that the system worked, that merit mattered, that race was no longer a barrier to achievement. But standing in that pickup line, being asked which family she nannied for, Nicole had been reminded once again that success did not insulate you from assumptions, that wealth did not change the way people saw your skin before they saw anything else, that the markers of class and accomplishment that should have signaled belonging were often invisible when the person carrying them was black. She pulled into the driveway, helped the kids out of the car, and followed them into the house where their actual nanny, a white woman named Claire, who was in her early 20s and came 3 afternoons a week to help with homework and activities, was waiting in the kitchen. Claire greeted the children warmly, asked about their day, and Nicole gave her a brief smile before heading upstairs to her home office, a bright space with built-in bookshelves and a desk that faced the window overlooking the backyard. She sat down, opened her laptop and tried to focus on the emails that had accumulated during the afternoon, but her mind kept returning to the interaction with Jennifer Caldwell, to the way the woman had smiled and asked her question as though it were perfectly reasonable, as though the idea that Nicole could be a parent at this school, at this institution that cost $45,000 a year per child, was so far outside the realm of possibility that it did not even merit consideration. Nicole pulled out her phone and texted her husband, "You won't believe what just happened at pickup." Dominic's response came a few minutes later. "Tell me." Nicole typed out the story, her fingers moving quickly over the screen, the anger translating into abbreviated sentences and punctuation that conveyed frustration. When she was done, she waited, and Dominic's response was immediate. "That's bullshit. Did you say anything?" "Nicole, I told her I was picking up my kids. She apologized, but it was so awkward. I don't even know what to do with this." "Dominic, do you want to report it? Talk to the school?" Nicole hesitated. The question forced her to confront the choice she faced. Let it go, chalk it up to one ignorant parent, move on with her day. Or escalate, make it an issue, risk being seen as difficult or oversensitive, or playing the race card. She had navigated this calculation countless times in her career, in her life, and she knew that speaking up often came with a cost, that it could make you a target, could shift the narrative from the offense committed to your response to it. But she also knew that if she stayed silent, nothing would change. The next black parent or nanny or staff member would face the same assumptions, would be questioned or dismissed or made to feel they did not belong. And Nicole had the resources, the platform, the security to push back in ways that others might not. She made a decision. "Nicole, let me think about it. I might reach out to the head of school. I need to figure out the right approach. Dominic, whatever you decide, I'm with you. This is unacceptable." They exchanged a few more messages, and then Nicole set the phone down and stared out the window, watching the light fade over the water, thinking about Riverside Academy and what it represented. The school was one of the most prestigious in Connecticut, a private institution that fed students into Ivy League universities and elite boarding schools, that prided itself on its rigorous academics and its commitment to character development and global citizenship. The tuition was steep, the admissions process competitive, and the student body was overwhelmingly white, though the school's website featured photos of diverse children and mission statements about inclusivity and belonging. Nicole and Dominic had chosen Riverside for Zara and Isaiah because of its reputation, because they wanted their children to have access to the best education, because they believed that excellence mattered and that their kids deserved to be in spaces that challenged them and prepared them for the world. But they had also been aware going into it that they would be one of a very small number of black families, that their children would stand out, that they would have to navigate dynamics of race and class in ways that white families did not. What Nicole had not anticipated was that she herself would be mistaken for the help, that despite her accomplishments and her wealth and her clear presence as a parent, someone would look at her and see only her race, only the assumption that a black woman at school pickup must be staff rather than family. She opened her laptop and navigated to the school's website, found the page for the administration, and located the email address for Dr. Eleanor Whitmore, the head of school. She opened a new message and began to type, "Dear Dr. Whitmore, I'm writing to bring to your attention an incident that occurred this afternoon during pickup. I was standing in the parent pickup area waiting for my children, Zara Harrison in 3rd grade and Isaiah Harrison in 1st grade, when another parent approached me and asked which family I worked for, assuming I was a nanny rather than a parent. When I corrected her, she apologized, but the interaction left me deeply troubled. This assumption, that a black woman at school pickup must be childcare staff rather than a parent, reflects biases that I believe are important for the school community to address. I am not writing to complain about a single parent's ignorance, but to raise a broader concern about the culture and assumptions that exist within our school community, and to ask what the school is doing to ensure that all parents and families are seen and respected as full members of the community. I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss this with you at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Nicole Harrison." She read over the email, made a few edits, and then hit send before she could second-guess herself. It was a measured approach, professional, focused on systemic issues rather than individual blame, and it gave the school an opportunity to respond constructively. Whether they would take that opportunity was another question. Nicole closed her laptop and went downstairs to find her children. Zara and Isaiah were in the playroom with Claire, building an elaborate structure out of blocks, and Nicole stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, feeling the fierce protectiveness that came with motherhood, the desire to shield them from the biases and assumptions that the world would throw at them, knowing that she could not, that the best she could do was teach them to recognize injustice and to stand up for themselves. She joined them on the floor, helped Isaiah add a tower to the structure, and tried to be present to let the anger from the afternoon recede into the background. But it stayed with her, a low hum beneath the surface, and she knew it would stay until something shifted, until the school responded, until she had some sense of whether this institution her children attended, this place that took their tuition and claimed to value them, would take her concerns seriously or dismiss them as the grievances of an oversensitive parent. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore responded to Nicole's email the next morning, a reply that arrived in Nicole's inbox at 7:30, while Nicole was in the kitchen making breakfast for the kids and checking the news on her tablet. The email was polite, expressed concern, and suggested a meeting for the following week. Nicole read it quickly, noted the lack of urgency, the passive language that acknowledged her feelings without necessarily agreeing that there was a problem, and she felt the first stirrings of frustration. She replied accepting the meeting, then forwarded the exchange to Dominic with a short note. "We'll see." The week passed in the usual rhythm of work and family, and Nicole tried to put the incident out of her mind, to focus on the upcoming product launch at Equiledger, on the kids' soccer games and piano lessons, on the normalcy of their lives. But she found herself watching the other parents at pickup more carefully, noting the easy camaraderie among the white mothers, the way they clustered together in conversation, the way they greeted each other by name. She noted, too, that she was rarely included in those conversations, that the other black and brown parents, the handful who existed, seemed to occupy a similar space of polite distance, acknowledged but not embraced. She mentioned this to Dominic one evening after the kids were in bed, the two of them sitting in the living room with glasses of wine, and Dominic nodded. "I've felt it too, at the school events. Like we're tolerated, but not really part of the community. I keep wondering if we made the right choice sending them there." Nicole leaned against him, felt the weight of the question. "I don't know. The academics are excellent. and Zara and Isaiah seem happy. But I hate that they're going to grow up navigating this, feeling like they have to prove they belong. They're going to navigate it no matter where they are, Dominic said quietly. At least here, they have us, and they have each other. And maybe we can push the school to be better, to actually live up to the values they claim to have. Nicole hoped he was right. The meeting with Dr. Whitmore was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 in the morning, in the head of school's office in the main administrative building. Nicole arrived a few minutes early, dressed in a tailored blazer and trousers, carrying a leather portfolio that contained notes she had prepared. The receptionist greeted her with a professional smile and directed her to a seating area, where she waited for 5 minutes before Dr. Whitmore emerged from her office. Eleanor Whitmore was in her late 50s, white, with short silver hair, and the kind of polished appearance that came from years of moving in wealthy circles. She extended her hand, and her smile was warm, but Nicole detected a wariness in her eyes, a calculation about how to handle this conversation. Ms. Harrison, thank you for coming in. Please come into my office. The office was spacious with wood-paneled walls and a large desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes on education and leadership. There were framed photos of Dr. Whitmore with various dignitaries and donors, and a wall of diplomas and awards. Nicole took a seat in one of the chairs facing the desk, and Dr. Whitmore settled into her own chair, folding her hands and giving Nicole her full attention. I want to start by saying that I'm very sorry about what happened during pickup last week, Dr. Whitmore began. That must have been an uncomfortable experience for you, and I can understand why you were upset. Nicole noted the phrasing, the way it focused on her feelings rather than the action itself, the way it positioned the issue as her discomfort rather than a problem with the school culture. Thank you, Nicole said carefully. But I want to be clear that my concern is not just about my feelings. It's about what that interaction reveals about assumptions within the school community. The parent who approached me made an assumption based on my race, and that assumption is part of a larger pattern. I'd like to understand what the school is doing to address these biases. Dr. Whitmore nodded, her expression sympathetic but guarded. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Riverside Academy is committed to diversity and inclusion, and we take these issues very seriously. We have a diversity committee, we do professional development for our faculty and staff, and we try to create a welcoming environment for all families. With respect, Dr. Whitmore, Nicole said, I'm sure those initiatives exist, but they don't seem to be translating into a culture where black parents are seen as parents rather than staff. I'd like to know what specific steps the school is taking to address this, and whether there are plans to provide any education or training for the parent community, not just faculty. Dr. Whitmore shifted slightly in her chair, and Nicole could see the discomfort, the resistance to the idea that the school had a responsibility to educate parents, that this was something beyond individual ignorance. The parent community is, of course, a bit more challenging to address, Dr. Whitmore said. Parents are not employees of the school, and we can't mandate training or behavior in the same way we can with staff. What I can do is raise this issue with the Parent Association, suggest that they consider programming around implicit bias and inclusion. But ultimately, Ms. Harrison, we can't control what parents say or assume. Nicole felt the anger sharpen. No, but you can set a tone. You can make it clear that assumptions like the one I experienced are not acceptable, that they reflect biases that the school does not condone. You can send a message to the parent community that all families deserve to be respected and seen as full members of this community. And if you're not willing to do that, then I have to question whether the school's commitment to diversity and inclusion is anything more than words on a website. There was a silence, heavy and charged, and Dr. Whitmore's expression became more closed, more defensive. Ms. Harrison, I hear your concerns and I want to work with you on this, but I also need you to understand that change takes time and that we're doing our best to create a culture of inclusion. I can commit to raising this with the Parent Association and with our Diversity Committee, and I can commit to having conversations with faculty about being mindful of these dynamics. But I can't promise overnight transformation. Nicole leaned forward, her voice steady but edged with steel. I'm not asking for overnight transformation. I'm asking for acknowledgement that there's a problem and for concrete steps to address it. If the school is serious about inclusion, then it needs to do more than issue statements and host committees. It needs to actively work to change the culture, and that includes holding parents accountable when they make assumptions or engage in behavior that marginalizes other families. Doctor. Whitmore took a breath, seemed to be choosing her words carefully. I will take your concerns to the board and to the parent association, and I will personally reach out to the parent involved, if you can provide me with her name, to address the incident directly. Nicole hesitated. She had not mentioned Jennifer Caldwell's name in her email, and she was not sure she wanted to turn this into a confrontation between two parents. But she also knew that without specifics, it would be easy for the school to frame this as a vague complaint, to avoid taking concrete action. Her name is Jennifer Caldwell, Nicole said. Her son is in 3rd grade, Parker. Dr. Whitmore wrote the name down, nodded. Thank you. I'll have a conversation with her, and I'll make sure she understands that her assumptions were inappropriate. They spoke for a few more minutes, circling around the same points, and then the meeting ended with polite but strained goodbyes. Nicole left the office feeling unsatisfied, sensing that the school would go through the motions of addressing her concerns without fundamentally changing anything, that this would be filed away as one parent's complaint rather than a signal of deeper issues. She walked to her car, sat in the driver's seat for a moment, and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts and found the name of another parent, Keisha Montgomery, one of the few other black mothers at Riverside. Nicole and Keisha had exchanged pleasantries at school events, but had never had a substantial conversation, and Nicole had always sensed a mutual awareness, an unspoken understanding of the dynamics they were both navigating. She composed a text. Hi Keisha, this is Nicole Harrison, Zara and Isaiah's mom. I had an incident at pickup last week that I wanted to talk to you about. Would you be open to getting coffee sometime soon? The response came within minutes. Absolutely. I'd love to. How about tomorrow morning? They made plans to meet at a cafe in town, and Nicole felt a small lift of relief, the sense that she was not alone in this, that there might be solidarity to be found. The next morning, Nicole and Keisha sat across from each other at a corner table in the cafe, steam rising from their coffee cups, and Nicole recounted the incident with Jennifer Caldwell. Keisha listened, her expression a mixture of recognition and frustration, and when Nicole finished, Keisha sighed. I'm not surprised, Keisha said. I've had similar things happen. Not quite as blatant, but the assumptions are there. At the school auction last year, someone asked me if I was there to help with coat check. At back-to-school night, a teacher asked if I was the au pair. It's constant, this sense that we're not quite seen as parents, as part of the community. Nicole felt the validation, the relief of having her experience confirmed, of not being told she was overreacting or misinterpreting. Have you ever said anything? Reported it? Keisha shook her head. No. I thought about it, but I didn't want to make waves, didn't want to be seen as the difficult black parent. My husband and I talked about it, and we decided to just focus on our kids, make sure they feel supported at home, and not engage with the school politics. But Nicole, I'm tired. I'm tired of biting my tongue, of pretending it doesn't bother me. Me too, Nicole said. And I think that's why I went to Dr. Whitmore. I wanted to see if the school would take it seriously, if they'd actually do something. But the meeting was frustrating. She was polite, but it felt performative, like she was checking a box rather than genuinely engaging with the issue. Keisha took a sip of her coffee, considered. So what are you going to do? Nicole had been asking herself the same question. I think I'm going to give them a chance to respond, to see if they follow through on what Dr. Whitmore said she'd do. But if nothing changes, if this just gets swept under the rug, then I'm going to escalate. I'll go to the board, I'll consider going public. I don't know yet, but I'm not going to just let it go. Keisha nodded slowly. If you do escalate, I want to be part of it. I'm ready to speak up, to add my voice, and I think there are other families who feel the same way, who are tired of being on the margins. They exchanged numbers, made plans to stay in touch, and when they parted, Nicole felt a sense of purpose, of coalition building, of the beginnings of something that could be larger than one parent's complaint. If you are following this story and recognizing the patterns of being seen but not recognized, of occupying spaces where your presence is tolerated but not celebrated, then you understand why Nicole Harrison and Keisha Montgomery sat in that cafe and decided they were done staying silent. These are the moments when individual frustrations coalesce into collective action, when people decide that the cost of speaking out is worth it if it means change. And if this resonates with you, if you see yourself or your community in this story, then consider sharing it, letting it be part of the larger conversation about who belongs and who decides. Over the next 2 weeks, Nicole heard nothing from Dr. Whitmore or from Jennifer Caldwell. She continued to attend pickup, continued to navigate the polite but distant interactions with other parents, and continued to document, in a private note on her phone, the small instances of being overlooked or questioned or made to feel out of place. It was subtle, cumulative, the way conversations stopped when she approached, the way her greetings were returned with tight smiles but no follow-up, the way she was never invited to the coffee mornings or the book clubs that seemed to organize spontaneously among the white mothers. Keisha reported similar experiences, and together they began to reach out to other black and brown parents, testing the waters, seeing who might be interested in having a larger conversation about the dynamics at Riverside. What they found was a mix of frustration and fear. Parents who had their own stories of being profiled or dismissed, but who were hesitant to speak out, worried about retaliation, worried about making things harder for their children. One parent, a South Asian father named Raj Patel, whose daughter was in 4th grade, said, "I get it, I really do, but my daughter loves this school, and I don't want to do anything that might make her a target. If we start raising issues, the school might push back, and then what? Do we pull our kids out? Do we stay and fight? I just don't know if it's worth the risk." Nicole understood the concern, the calculation that every parent of color had to make about when and how to engage with predominantly white institutions. But she also felt the urgency, the sense that if they did not push now, nothing would change, that their children would continue to navigate a space where they were not fully seen or valued. In mid-November, Nicole received an email from Dr. Whitmore, a brief message stating that she had spoken with Jennifer Caldwell, that Jennifer had expressed remorse for her assumption, and that the Parent Association was considering programming on implicit bias for the spring. The email was polite, bureaucratic, and felt to Nicole like an attempt to close the matter without any substantive action. Nicole forwarded the email to Keisha with a note. "This is what I was afraid of. They're going through the motions." Keisha's response was immediate. "So what's next? Are we escalating?" Nicole thought about it, talked it over with Dominic that evening, and made a decision. She drafted a letter to the Board of Trustees, a more detailed and forceful articulation of the concerns she had raised with Dr. Whitmore, and she asked Keisha and 2 other parents, including Raj, who had decided he was willing to sign on, to co-sign the letter. The letter outlined the incident with Jennifer Caldwell, described the broader pattern of marginalization, and called on the board to conduct a comprehensive review of the school's culture and practices related to diversity and inclusion. The letter was sent in early December, and within a week Nicole received a response from the board chair, a man named Robert Dennison, who was a retired investment banker and longtime Riverside parent and grandparent. The response requested a meeting with Nicole and the other signatories, and the meeting was scheduled for mid-December, during the week before winter break. The meeting took place in the boardroom, a formal space with a long mahogany table and portraits of past heads of school on the walls. Nicole, Keisha, Raj, and another parent named Aisha Carter, whose son was in 2nd grade, sat on one side of the table, and facing them were Robert Dennison, Dr. Whitmore, and 2 other board members. The atmosphere was tense, polite but charged, and Nicole could feel the weight of being in a room where she was outnumbered, where her concerns were being weighed against the institution's desire to protect its reputation. Robert Dennison opened the meeting by thanking them for coming, acknowledging the seriousness of their concerns, and expressing the board's commitment to addressing them. Then he turned to Dr. Whitmore and asked her to provide an update on what had been done since Nicole's initial email. Dr. Whitmore walked through the steps she had taken, the conversation with Jennifer Caldwell, the discussions with the Parent Association, the proposal for spring programming on implicit bias. She spoke in measured tones, framing the actions as responsive and proactive, and Nicole listened, feeling the gap between what had been done and what needed to be done. When Dr. Whitmore finished, Robert turned to Nicole. "Ms. Harrison, I understand you feel these steps are insufficient. Can you articulate what you believe the school should be doing differently?" Nicole had prepared for this, had thought through what she wanted to say, and she spoke clearly and directly. The issue is not just about one parent making a bad assumption. The issue is about a culture at this school where black and brown families are consistently made to feel like we are on the margins, like we are guests rather than full members of the community. My children are students here. We pay tuition just like every other family, and yet I am questioned and dismissed in ways that white parents are not. That is not acceptable, and it cannot be addressed with a single conversation or a workshop in the spring. It requires a fundamental shift in how the school thinks about inclusion, how it trains its staff, how it engages with parents, and how it holds people accountable when they perpetuate bias. She paused, let the words settle, and then continued. I want to see the school conduct a climate survey, asking all families about their experiences, broken down by race and ethnicity. I want to see the school commit to anti-bias training for all staff and faculty, not just once, but on an ongoing basis. I want to see the school create a clear process for reporting and addressing incidents of discrimination, with transparency about outcomes. And I want to see the school make a genuine effort to recruit and retain Black and brown families, so that my children are not one of a handful in a sea of white faces. Robert Dennison listened, taking notes, and when Nicole finished, he nodded. Those are reasonable requests, and I can commit to bringing them to the full board. But Ms. Harrison, I also want to be realistic with you about what we can and cannot do. Riverside Academy is a private institution, and our parent community is largely self-selecting. We can work to make the school more welcoming, but we cannot force families to enroll, and we cannot control the demographics of Greenwich. Nicole felt the frustration rise. I understand that. But you can control the culture of this school. You can control how people are treated once they're here, and you can make it clear that discrimination and bias are not tolerated. That's not about demographics. That's about values. Keisha spoke up then, her voice steady and firm. I want to add that this is not just about making us feel better. It's about creating an environment where our children can thrive, where they don't have to navigate constant microaggressions, where they can see themselves reflected in the curriculum and in the community. If Riverside truly values diversity, then it needs to invest in that. Not just in recruitment, but in retention, in making sure families like ours want to stay. The conversation continued for another hour, with Raj and Aisha adding their perspectives, with the board members asking questions and making notes, and by the end, Nicole felt cautiously hopeful that the board was taking them seriously, that there might be genuine movement. But she also knew that promises were easy, that the real test would be in the implementation, in whether the school followed through or whether this meeting would be filed away as a gesture, a nod to diversity without any real change. The board committed to conducting a climate survey in the new year, to forming a task force on diversity and inclusion that would include parent representatives, and to implementing mandatory anti-bias training for all staff and faculty by the start of the next school year. It was more than Nicole had expected from the meeting, and yet she could not shake the feeling that it was still not enough, that the culture of the school ran deeper than policies and training could touch. Winter break came, and Nicole and Dominic took the kids to the Caribbean for a week, a chance to decompress and to focus on family. But even on vacation, Nicole found herself thinking about Riverside, about the battles ahead, about whether they should stay or find a different school, one where Zara and Isaiah would not have to carry the burden of being among the few, of being constantly questioned and othered. Dominic, lying beside her on the beach one afternoon while the kids played in the surf, said, "You know we don't have to keep fighting this. We could find another school, start fresh somewhere that's already more diverse." Nicole considered it, watching Zara and Isaiah, their laughter carrying over the sound of the waves. "I've thought about it, but I also feel like if we leave, nothing changes. We're just one less family pushing for better. And I don't know if there is a school that's already more diverse at this level, at least not in our area. The whole system is set up this way, and unless we challenge it, it stays that way." "I know," Dominic said. "I just hate that you're carrying so much of this, that it's taking up so much space in your head." Nicole smiled, reached for his hand. "I hate it too, but I also think it matters, and I'd rather fight and lose than not fight at all." They returned from vacation in early January, and the climate survey was launched a week later. It was a comprehensive questionnaire sent to all families, asking about their experiences at Riverside, their sense of belonging, their interactions with staff and other parents, their perceptions of how the school handled diversity and inclusion. The survey was anonymous, designed by an outside consulting firm, and the results were to be shared with the community in March. Nicole filled out the survey with care, detailing her experiences, providing specific examples, and noting patterns she had observed. She encouraged Keisha and the other parents in their growing coalition to do the same, and she knew that the survey results would be telling, would either validate their concerns or suggest that they were outliers, a small group of dissatisfied parents rather than representatives of a larger problem. In February, the Diversity Task Force held its first meeting. Nicole had been invited to serve on the task force, along with Keisha, Raj, and several white parents who had expressed interest in the work. The task force was chaired by one of the board members, a woman named Patricia Lawson, who had a background in non-profit leadership and who seemed genuinely committed to the cause. The first meeting was introductory, setting goals and expectations, and Nicole left feeling cautiously optimistic that the task force could be a vehicle for real change. But optimism was tempered by the ongoing reality of daily life at Riverside. Zara came home one day in tears, saying that a classmate had told her that her hair was messy and asking why she did not comb it. Isaiah reported that during a class discussion about families, the teacher had asked students to share what their parents did for work, and when Isaiah said his mum was a CEO, a classmate had said that was not possible, that only men could be CEOs. Each incident was small, individually deniable, but collectively they painted a picture of a school where black children were consistently made to feel different, lesser, out of place. Nicole brought these incidents to Dr. Whitmore's attention, and Dr. Whitmore responded with concern, promised to address them with the teachers involved, but Nicole could see that the school was not equipped to handle the complexity of these dynamics, that the teachers were well-meaning but lacked the training and awareness to recognize and interrupt bias in real time. The climate survey results were released in mid-March, and they were stark. The data showed that families of color reported significantly lower levels of satisfaction and belonging than white families, that they were more likely to feel marginalized or dismissed, that they had less confidence in the school's ability to handle incidents of bias or discrimination. The results validated everything Nicole and the other parents had been saying, and they sparked a wave of conversation and controversy within the school community. Some parents, particularly white parents, expressed shock and dismay, said they had no idea that families of color were having such negative experiences, vowed to do better. Others were defensive, questioned the methodology of the survey, suggested that the results were skewed by a small number of dissatisfied families who were overly sensitive or looking for problems. The debate played out in parent association meetings, in private group chats, in tense conversations at pick-up and drop-off. Nicole watched the response with a mixture of satisfaction and frustration. The data was undeniable, and yet there was resistance, a desire to minimize or explain away the findings rather than to sit with the discomfort of knowing that the school had failed so many families. She and Keisha and the other parents in their coalition began to strategize about how to use the data to push for concrete action, to ensure that the survey was not just a moment of awareness, but a catalyst for change. The Diversity Task Force met again in late March, and the conversation was difficult. Some members wanted to move slowly, to focus on education and awareness, to avoid alienating the parent community with demands that felt too aggressive. Others, including Nicole and Keisha, pushed for more ambitious goals: mandatory training, revised curriculum, recruitment targets, accountability mechanisms. The meeting ended without consensus, and Nicole left feeling that the task force was at risk of becoming another committee that met and talked but accomplished little. She voiced this concern to Dominic that evening, and he listened, then said, "Maybe it's time to go public. You've worked within the system, you've given them chances to respond, and it feels like they're still not moving fast enough. If you take this outside the school, put some public pressure on them, it might force their hand." Nicole had been thinking the same thing, but the idea of going public felt like crossing a line, like escalating in a way that could not be undone. "If we go public, it becomes a thing," she said. "It's going to blow up and we're going to be at the center of it. Are we ready for that?" "Are they?" Dominic countered. "The school has a reputation to protect, and if this becomes a story about a prestigious institution failing its families of color, that's going to hurt them. Maybe that's what it takes to get real movement." Nicole thought about it, talked it over with Keisha and the other parents, and they made a decision. They would write an op-ed, submit it to local and national outlets, making their case public, putting Riverside Academy on notice that their patience was running out. Nicole drafted the op-ed over a weekend, working late into the night, trying to capture the frustration and the hope and the urgent need for change. She wrote about the incident at pickup, about the climate survey results, about the ways that her children were navigating a space that did not fully see or value them. She wrote about the promises the school had made and the gap between those promises and the reality. And she ended with a call to action, urging other families, other schools, to confront the ways that bias and exclusion persisted in spaces that claimed to be progressive and inclusive. Keisha, Raj, and Aisha reviewed the draft, offered edits and additions, and they all signed their names to the piece. Nicole submitted it to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, to Education Week, and within a week the Times accepted it for publication. The op-ed was scheduled to run the following Sunday in the opinion section, and Nicole braced for the response. The op-ed was published on a Sunday in early April under the headline, "At my children's elite school, I was mistaken for the nanny. The problem goes deeper than one parent's ignorance." The piece was powerful, detailed, and it named Riverside Academy explicitly, describing the school and the incident and the systemic issues that the survey had revealed. By midday, it was trending on social media, shared by parents and educators and activists, sparking conversations about private schools and diversity and the ways that wealth did not insulate black families from racism. The response was immediate and intense. The school's phone lines and email inbox were flooded with messages, some supportive, some critical, some from prospective families asking whether they should reconsider applying. The board held an emergency meeting, and by Monday afternoon, they had issued a statement acknowledging the concerns raised in the op-ed, committing to accelerating the timeline for the Diversity Task Force's recommendations, and expressing a desire to work collaboratively with families to create a more inclusive environment. It was a stronger response than previous statements, but Nicole could see that it was driven by crisis management, by the need to contain the damage to the school's reputation, rather than by genuine commitment to change. She and the other parents were invited to meet with the board again, this time with more urgency, more attention, and the sense that the power dynamic had shifted, that they now had leverage. If you have been following Nicole and the coalition of parents she built, if you have seen how they moved from individual frustrations to collective action to public advocacy, then you understand that change often requires making people uncomfortable, requires putting institutions on notice that silence is no longer an option. And if this story resonates with you, if it reminds you of your own battles or the battles of people you care about, then share it, talk about it, let it be part of the larger movement toward accountability and justice in spaces that claim to be for everyone. The second board meeting was different from the first. There was less politeness, more directness, and a recognition from the board that the stakes had changed, that the school's reputation was on the line, that they could not afford to be seen as dismissive or performative. Robert Dennison opened by acknowledging the impact of the op-ed, by expressing the board's commitment to addressing the issues raised, and by inviting Nicole and the other parents to present a list of specific demands. Nicole had prepared for this, had worked with Keisha and the others to draft a comprehensive set of proposals. She handed out copies and walked through each item. Mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, faculty and board members, with annual refreshers, revisions to the curriculum to include more diverse voices and perspectives, the creation of an ombudsman position, someone independent who could receive complaints and ensure accountability, targets for recruiting and retaining families of color, with transparency about progress, and a commitment to addressing the climate survey findings with concrete action plans and public reporting. The list was ambitious, and Nicole could see the board members exchanging glances, calculating the cost and the effort and the potential resistance from the parent community. But she also saw something else, a recognition that they had no choice, that the alternative was continued bad press, potential enrollment declines, and the loss of any claim to being a leader in diversity and inclusion. Robert Dennison said, "These are significant asks and some of them will require substantial resources and time, but I want to be clear with you that the board is committed to making Riverside a place where all families feel welcomed and valued. We're not going to get everything perfect overnight, but we're going to try." It was the closest thing to an admission of failure that Nicole had heard from the school, and she took it as a sign that the public pressure was working, that the school was finally taking them seriously. Over the next several weeks, the board worked with the Diversity Task Force to develop an implementation plan, assigning timelines and responsibilities, identifying resources, and beginning the work of change. The school announced the hiring of a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, a black woman named Dr. Charlene Brooks, who had a background in independent school leadership and a reputation for transformative work. Dr. Brooks started in June, and she immediately began meeting with families, assessing the school's culture, and developing a strategic plan. Nicole met with her early on, and she was impressed by Dr. Brooks's directness, her refusal to sugarcoat the challenges, and her clear vision for what needed to change. "This is going to be a long process," Dr. Brooks told Nicole. "There's a lot of work to do, and there will be resistance. But I want you to know that I'm here because I believe it's possible, because I believe Riverside can become a genuinely inclusive place, and I'm going to need your help, and the help of families like yours to get there." Nicole felt a cautious hope, the sense that maybe finally the school was on a path toward real change. But she also knew that Dr. Brooks was one person, that the culture of an institution was bigger than any individual, and that sustained change would require ongoing effort, ongoing vigilance, ongoing willingness to push back when things slipped. The summer passed, and Nicole and Dominic talked seriously about whether to keep Zara and Isaiah at Riverside or to find another school. The op-ed had brought attention and pressure, but it had also made their family more visible, more scrutinized. And there were moments when Nicole wondered if the cost was too high, if the stress and the conflict were worth it for the sake of staying in a school that had treated them so poorly. But Zara and Isaiah, when asked, said they wanted to stay. They had friends, they liked their teachers, and they felt, in their own words, like they were part of something important, part of making the school better. Their resilience and their commitment moved Nicole, and she decided to give it one more year to see if the changes being promised would materialize, to see if Riverside could become a place where her children truly belonged. The new school year started in September, and the changes were visible from the beginning. Dr. Brooks had implemented a revised orientation for new families, one that explicitly addressed the school's commitment to diversity and inclusion and set expectations for behavior. The curriculum had been updated to include more diverse authors and perspectives, and teachers had undergone training over the summer on culturally responsive pedagogy. The ombudsman position had been filled, and there was a new process for reporting and addressing incidents of bias, with transparency about outcomes. Nicole watched these changes with cautious optimism, noting the ways that the school was different, the ways that conversations at pickup and in parent meetings had shifted, the ways that more families of color seemed to be enrolling. But she also noted the resistance, the parents who grumbled about political correctness, the ones who withdrew their children in protest, the ones who made their displeasure known in passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled complaints. One incident in particular stood out. At a parent association meeting in October, a white parent stood up and said, "I appreciate the work the school is doing on diversity, but I'm concerned that we're spending so much time and resources on this issue that we're losing focus on academic excellence. I didn't send my child to Riverside to be part of a social experiment." The comment was met with murmurs of agreement from some parents and sharp intakes of breath from others. Nicole, who was attending the meeting, raised her hand and was called on. She stood, looked directly at the parent who had spoken and said, "Diversity and academic excellence are not mutually exclusive. In fact, research shows that diverse learning environments improve outcomes for all students, not just students of color. And if you think that teaching children to respect and value people who are different from them is a social experiment rather than a fundamental part of education, then I'd suggest you reconsider what you think Riverside's mission is." The room was silent for a moment, and then another parent, a white mother Nicole had seen at pickup but never spoken to, stood and said, "I want to thank Nicole for saying that. I've been watching the changes this year, and I think they're making Riverside a better school, a more reflective place, and I'm proud to be part of a community that's willing to do this work." The comment was met with applause, and Nicole felt a shift in the room, a sense that there were allies, that the coalition of parents pushing for change was not just families of color, but also white families who saw the value in inclusion, who wanted their children to grow up in a more equitable world. The year continued, and the changes deepened. Dr. Brooks implemented affinity groups for students of color, spaces where they could gather and support each other and discuss their experiences. She also launched a speaker series, bringing in authors and activists and educators to talk about race and equity and social justice. And she began working with the board on long-term strategic planning, setting goals for the next 5 years, committing to ongoing assessment and accountability. Nicole remained involved, serving on the diversity task force, attending parent meetings, providing feedback and pushing for continued progress. It was exhausting work, on top of her responsibilities at Equiledger, on top of parenting, on top of the ordinary demands of life. But she also found it meaningful, found solidarity in the relationship she had built with other parents, found purpose in knowing that her children were growing up in a school that was slowly becoming more just. 2 years after the incident at Pickup, the incident that had started everything, Nicole attended a parent association meeting where Dr. Brooks presented data on the school's progress. The numbers were encouraging. The percentage of students of color had increased from 8% to 14%. Retention rates for families of color had improved, and climate survey results showed significant gains in sense of belonging and satisfaction. There were still disparities, still work to be done, but the trend was positive. After the presentation, several parents approached Nicole, thanking her for her leadership, for her willingness to speak out, for making the school confront issues that had been ignored for too long. One parent, a white father whose son was in Zara's grade, said, "I want you to know that I was one of the people who was resistant at first. I thought this focus on diversity was going to take away from what made Riverside special, but I was wrong. My son is a better person, a more empathetic person, because of the changes that have been made. So thank you." Nicole felt the emotion rise, the validation, the sense that the fight had been worth it. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "It means a lot." She found Keisha after the meeting, and they hugged, both of them tearful, both of them feeling the weight of what they had accomplished. "We did it," Keisha said. "We actually made a difference." "We did," Nicole said. "But it's not over. We have to keep pushing, keep holding them accountable." "I know," Keisha said, "but tonight let's just celebrate." They went out for dinner, just the two of them, and they talked about the journey, about the moments of doubt and frustration, about the small victories and the larger shifts. And they talked about their children, about Zara and Isaiah and Keisha's daughter Maya, about how they were thriving, how they were growing up in a school that was better than the one Nicole and Keisha had walked into. 3 years after the op-ed, Nicole was invited to speak at a conference on diversity in independent schools, and she accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to share what they had learned, to encourage other parents and educators to take on the work of making their schools more inclusive. She spoke about the incident at Pickup, about the climate survey, about the op-ed and the public pressure, and the slow, difficult work of institutional change. And she spoke about the importance of coalition building, of not going it alone, of finding allies and building power and refusing to accept less than your children deserved. The talk was well received, and after, several parents approached her to share their own stories, to ask for advice, to express gratitude for her willingness to speak out. One woman, a black mother from a school in Boston, said, "You gave me hope. I've been dealing with similar issues at my son's school, and I've been afraid to say anything, afraid of making things worse. But hearing your story, I realize I have to try. Thank you." Nicole felt the weight of that, the responsibility of having her story become part of something larger, and she told the woman, "You're not alone. And if you need support, reach out. There are people who will stand with you." She meant it. And over the next few years, Nicole became an informal advisor to parents at other schools who were navigating similar challenges, offering guidance, connecting them with resources, sharing the lessons she had learned. It was work that took time and energy, but it was work that felt essential, part of the ongoing effort to dismantle systems of exclusion and to create spaces where all children could thrive. Zara graduated from Riverside Academy in the spring of 2033, 8 years after the incident at Pickup, and at her graduation she was valedictorian, the first black student to hold that honor in the school's history. In her speech, she talked about the changes she had witnessed at Riverside, about the importance of speaking up when you see injustice, about the courage it took for her mother and other parents to demand better. She thanked Dr. Brooks, thanked the teachers who had supported her, and thanked her parents for showing her what it meant to fight for what you believed in. Nicole sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face, holding Dominic's hand, and felt a profound sense of pride and accomplishment. Zara's success was her own, earned through hard work and intelligence and determination, but it was also a testament to the environment that had been created, the school that had been transformed, the community that had been built. And if you have stayed with this story, if you have walked with Nicole from that moment in the pickup line, when she was asked which family she nannied for, through the anger and the organizing and the public advocacy and the slow, uneven progress toward change, then you know that this is not just about one school or one family. It is about the larger work of creating institutions that see and value all people, that do not require black parents to prove their belonging, that do not place the burden of education and awareness solely on the shoulders of those who are marginalized. If this story has moved you, if it has inspired you to think about your own spheres of influence, about the ways you can push for justice and inclusion, then carry it with you, share it with others, let it be part of the conversation about building a better world. Isaiah graduated from Riverside 4 years after Zara, and by then the school had changed even more. The percentage of students of color had reached 22%, and there were multiple affinity groups, a robust curriculum that centered diverse voices, and a parent community that, while not perfect, was far more engaged with issues of equity and inclusion than it had been a decade earlier. Dr. Brooks had moved on to lead another school, but her successor, also a person of color, continued the work, continued to push the school toward its stated values. Nicole and Dominic looked back on the decision to stay at Riverside, on the choice to fight rather than flee, and they felt that it had been the right one. It had been hard, exhausting, often thankless, but it had also been transformative, not just for the school but for their family, for the relationships they had built, for the lessons their children had learned about standing up for what was right. Nicole's company, Equiledger, continued to grow, and she used her platform to advocate for diversity in the tech industry, to support black entrepreneurs, to fund organizations working on educational equity. She served on boards, gave talks, mentored younger founders, and remained committed to using her success to create opportunities for others. Dominic advanced to partner at his law firm, one of the first black partners in the firm's history, and he too used his position to push for change, to recruit and mentor lawyers of color, to take on pro bono cases related to civil rights and social justice. And Zara and Isaiah, now young adults, carried forward the lessons they had learned at Riverside and at home. Zara was studying political science and education policy, interested in the ways that schools could be engines of equity or engines of inequality, determined to contribute to the work of making education more just. Isaiah was exploring interests in engineering and design, but he was also deeply engaged with questions of representation and access, thinking about how technology could be used to dismantle rather than reinforce systems of exclusion. One evening, years after the incident that had started it all, Nicole and Zara were having dinner together, just the two of them, and Zara said, "Mom, I've been thinking about that day when you got asked which family you nannied for. I was so young, I didn't really understand what was happening at the time. But looking back, I realized that was the day everything changed, the day you decided you weren't going to let it slide." Nicole nodded, remembering the moment, the anger and the decision and the cascade of events that had followed. "It was a choice," she said, "and it was hard, and there were times I wasn't sure it was worth it. But Zara, I look at you, and I look at Isaiah, and I see the people you've become, the values you hold, the way you move through the world, and I think it was worth it. Because you grew up in a place that, by the time you left, was better than when you arrived. And you know what it takes to make that happen." Zara reached across the table, squeezed her mother's hand. "I'm proud of you, Mum, for fighting, for not giving up, for showing me what courage looks like." Nicole felt the tears prick at her eyes, felt the weight of her daughter's words, the validation and the love. "Thank you, sweetheart, that means everything." They finished their dinner, and as they walked out into the evening, Nicole thought about the journey, about the pickup line and the assumptions and the years of work that had followed. She thought about the other parents who had stood with her, about the students who had benefited from the changes, about the institution that had been forced to confront its failings and to do better. It was not a perfect story, not one where everything was fixed and everyone lived happily ever after. But it was a story of resistance, of refusal to accept the unacceptable, of using voice and platform and persistence to bend institutions toward justice. And that, Nicole had come to understand, was the work of a lifetime, the work that was never finished, but always worth doing. The years continued, and Nicole remained involved in education advocacy, serving on the boards of organizations working on equity in independent schools, speaking at conferences, supporting parents who were navigating similar challenges. She also wrote a book, published 5 years after Zara's graduation, titled Mistaken Identity: A Black Mother's Fight for Belonging in an Elite School. The book was part memoir, part call to action, and it became a bestseller, used in college courses and book clubs and teacher training programs. The book tour took Nicole to cities across the country, and at each event, she met parents and educators who had their own stories, their own battles, their own frustrations with institutions that claimed to value diversity but struggled to deliver on that promise. She listened to their stories, offered advice and connected people, building networks of support and solidarity. One event in particular stayed with her. She was speaking at a bookstore in Atlanta, and after her talk, a young black woman approached her, tears in her eyes. "I just want to thank you," the woman said. "I read your book and it made me realize that I don't have to accept the way I'm treated at my daughter's school. I've been dealing with microaggressions and assumptions for years, and I thought I was being too sensitive, that I should just be grateful my daughter has access to a good school. But your book gave me permission to demand better, to fight for my child. So thank you." Nicole hugged the woman, felt the connection, the sense that her story had become part of a larger movement, a collective effort to transform schools and institutions and the ways that race shaped access and belonging. "Though you're not too sensitive," Nicole told her, "trust your instincts and don't let anyone make you feel like your concerns aren't valid. And if you need support, there are people who will stand with you." The woman nodded, wiped her eyes, and thanked Nicole again. And watching her walk away, Nicole felt a deep sense of purpose, a sense that the work she had done, the risks she had taken, the battles she had fought, had rippled out beyond Riverside Academy, beyond her own children, and had become part of something larger, something that would continue long after she was gone. 10 years after the incident at Pickup, Riverside Academy held a 10th anniversary celebration of its Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, the one that had been launched in response to the climate survey and the op-ed and the pressure from Nicole and other parents. The event was held in the school's auditorium, and it featured speakers and performances and a panel discussion about the progress that had been made and the work that remained. Nicole was invited to speak, and she stood on the stage where she had watched her children perform in school plays and concerts, and she looked out at the audience, a mix of current parents and alumni and faculty and students, and she told the story again, the story of the pickup line and the assumption and the choice to speak out. She talked about the fear and the doubt and the solidarity she had found, and she talked about the changes that had been made, the ways that Riverside had become a better place, a more just place, because people had refused to accept the status quo. And she ended with a challenge: "The work is not done, it is never done." Institutions do not change themselves. They are changed by people who demand better, who refuse to be silent, who build coalitions and apply pressure and hold leaders accountable. So I challenge everyone in this room, whether you are a parent or a teacher or a student or a board member, to ask yourself what you are doing to make this school, this community, this world more just. Because that is the work we are all called to do, every single day. The audience erupted in applause, and Nicole stepped off the stage feeling the weight of the moment, the sense of coming full circle, of standing in a place that had once made her feel invisible and unwelcome, and being celebrated for the work she had done to change it. After the event, she stood in the lobby talking to parents and students and teachers, and Jennifer Caldwell, the woman who had asked her which family she nannied for all those years ago, approached. Jennifer looked older, her face lined with age and perhaps with the knowledge of what she had set in motion. She stood in front of Nicole, hands clasped, and said, "Nicole, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm the one who made that assumption at Pickup all those years ago. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry and that I'm grateful for what you did. You changed this school and you changed me. I've spent the last 10 years trying to do better, trying to be more aware, trying to raise my son to be different than I was. So thank you." Nicole looked at her, saw the sincerity, the regret, and felt a complicated mix of emotions. She could not forget what Jennifer had done, could not erase the humiliation and the anger, but she could also see that Jennifer had learned, had changed, and that was something. "Thank you for saying that," Nicole said. "And thank you for being willing to do the work of changing. That's what it takes for all of us." They shook hands and Jennifer walked away, and Nicole stood in the lobby, feeling the weight of the decade that had passed, the battles won and lost, the progress made and the distance still to go. She thought about Zara and Isaiah, about the lives they were building, about the values they carried. She thought about the other parents who had stood with her, about the students who had benefited from the changes, about the institution that had been forced to grow. And she thought about that moment in the pickup line, the moment that had changed everything, the moment when she had been asked which family she nannied for and had made the choice not to stay silent, not to let it go, but to demand that people see her children, see all black families as full members of the community, deserving of respect and dignity. It had been a long journey and it had been hard, but standing in that lobby, surrounded by people who had been changed by the work, Nicole felt a profound sense of accomplishment, of having contributed to something meaningful, of having used her voice and her platform to make the world a little bit more just. And if you have traveled with Nicole through this story, from that moment of assumption and erasure to this moment of celebration and reflection, then you know that change is possible, that institutions can be transformed, that the work of justice is ongoing and essential and worth every bit of the cost. Carry this story with you. Share it with others. Let it be part of your own commitment to building a world where everyone belongs, where assumptions give way to recognition, where all children can grow up knowing they are seen and valued for who they are.